Here's a story you'll definitely want to hear to the end. Happy listening. Chapter I, Palimpsest. Julian and I have decided you are no longer a good fit for us, she said, and her voice, devoid of all inflection, fell into the silence of the room like a stone into a deep well. Pack your things. I stared at Serafina, my brain refusing to process the string of sounds. It was as if I had heard a phrase in a long-forgotten dead language. Serafina stood by the tall, arched window, her figure in a severe storm sky-colored dress appearing as a black silhouette against the gray, weeping morning. She didn't blink, didn't move a muscle, the perfection of composure, a goddess of justice delivering a verdict that could not be disputed. "What? I didn't quite hear you, Serafina. Is something wrong with Julian?" I asked again, and my own voice sounded foreign and pathetic like the squeak of a mouse under the floorboards of this vast, echoing house. "You heard me perfectly well," she cut in. "His course of treatment is complete. Julian has thought everything through and has come to his senses. Your presence here is no longer advisable." Course of treatment complete, no longer advisable. The words were chosen with medical precision, with the coldness of a formal report. I surveyed the living room, this flawless, expensive cage. A black Steinway grand piano gleamed with its lacquered lid, resembling a luxurious sarcophagus. The heavy velvet curtains, which she and I had chosen together, now seemed like a theater curtain hiding some terrible scene. And the portrait of Julian above the fireplace. The artist, damn him, had managed to capture his essence, not the calm, smiling Julian of recent months, but the one from before, with the feverish, haunted gaze and such torment in the corners of his lips that you wanted to look away. A crack in a priceless vase. My job had been to glue that vase back together. But how? I swallowed a thick saliva. "But last night he—" "What happened last night was part of the therapy." Her voice grew a little quieter, but that only made it sharper. "You were the medicine. A potent one, I admit. But no one continues to take medication after they've recovered. It can cause side effects." And in that instant I felt it. The first side effect. A terrible, soul-sucking emptiness. As if all my insides, all my feelings, my entire own small and simple life had been pulled out of me in one motion, leaving only a thin shell stretched over a framework of humiliation. My head swam and I grabbed the back of a chair for support. Along with the emptiness came something else, something alien. An image flared behind my retinas with the brightness of a magnesium flash, the dark water of a canal, ripples from a thrown stone, pearls scattered on the wet cobblestones like knocked-out teeth, and a smell, the smell of river silt and something else, a sweet, nauseating scent of wilting lilies. "What's happening?" I whispered, looking through Serafina into the frightening depths of this vision. "What's happening is what we feared." She took a step toward me for the first time in our conversation. She smelled of lavender and cold. "You turned out to be too good a conductor, too porous. His nightmares, his pain, his memory, we thought you would be a drain for them, that they would pass through you and into the ground. But they didn't leave. They settled in you. You have become a palimpsest. The old text has bled through the new." A palimpsest? A drain? A conductor. They were dissecting me, giving each of my qualities a humiliating technical definition. I had come here a year ago, responding to an advertisement full of ambiguities, seeking a companion sitter with developed empathy for a creative individual who has experienced a profound nervous shock. At the interview, Serafina had been as frank as a person of her nature could be. Her husband, the brilliant art restorer Julian, had lost his peace of mind after a tragic incident. He suffered from panic attacks and obsessive memories. My role was to be there, to be his shadow, his echo, to absorb his black despair, to listen to the incoherent ramblings he sometimes uttered in his sleep, and never, under any circumstances, to ask questions about the past. I was to become a blank page, and I became one. I listened, I absorbed. I held his icy hand when he shivered in a fever, whispering the same name over and over. Clara, Clara, I'm sorry. I didn't know who this Clara was. I was ordered not to know. And gradually, he began to thaw. The terror in his eyes was replaced by weariness and then by a quiet interest. He began to pick up his brushes, to talk to me about music, about art. He looked at me with such tenderness, with such helpless gratitude, that I made the ultimate mistake. I believed. I believed that I was not a function, but a person, that I was saving him, that he needed me. Julian is resting now. Serafina's voice brought me back to reality. I insisted he take a sedative. He shouldn't see you. Your current state, she ran an appraising, almost contemptuous gaze over me, might provoke a relapse. It's like showing a recovered patient his own amputated limb. So, you infected me? The notion was so hideous that my tongue could barely form the words. You transferred his sickness into me? We gave his suffering an outlet. She corrected without a trace of emotion, and you became that outlet, a vessel for his filth. Now the vessel is full, and it must be disposed of. In your room, in the desk drawer, there is an envelope. It contains more than generous payment for your service. It will be enough for you to disappear and settle somewhere no one knows you. She turned away to the window, making it clear the audience was over. I was left alone in the midst of this icy, sterile beauty. I had been used as a vessel for poison, and now I was being thrown away because the poison had soaked into the walls. But they had miscalculated. In throwing me away, they hadn't considered that poison is not just a liquid. It is a memory, and now that memory was mine. It pulsed within me. It showed me pearls on wet stone and demanded to know whose pearls they were. And I understood that I couldn't just leave and start a new life. My life was over. In its place, another had begun. A life of investigation, a life as a palimpsest, where, beneath my own features, the face of a dead woman named Clara was becoming clearer and clearer. Chapter 2. The Scar on the Mirror. I found myself in the featureless room of a cheap hotel. The air smelled of dust and desperation. On the bedspread, like a poisonous mushroom, lay a thick envelope of money, payment for my soul. I walked to the murky mirror above the sink and stared at my reflection. A stranger looked back at me from the other side. My features, but not my eyes. In the depths of my pupils, like silt at the bottom of a river, lay an alien, viscous sorrow. I was a haunted house, and the ghost was beginning to make itself at home, rearranging the furniture in my mind. The emptiness I had felt at Serafina's house began to fill, but not with my own thoughts, but with fragments of someone else's. The name Clara beat against my temples like a trapped bird. I could feel the phantom scent of lilies, cloying, sweet, funereal. It was not a memory, but a physical sensation. I realized that running was pointless. No matter where I went, I would carry this burden with me. They hadn't just thrown me out, they had made me a living archive of their crime, stamping it with the seal of oblivion. But the archive did not want to be forgotten. The memory they had poured into me demanded satisfaction. Serafina's money, those 30 pieces of silver, became my only weapon. I rented the room for a month and bought the most expensive laptop I could find. I became a detective on the trail of a ghost. Julian was a well-known figure in the art world, a restorer with a famous name. I began to methodically sift through the internet, typing combinations into the search bar. Julian, art restoration, scandal, tragedy, and of course, Clara. The results came quickly. A newspaper clipping from 2 years ago, a society column with a black border. Talented artist Clara Vance has tragically passed away. The official version was suicide. A young, promising protege of the brilliant Julian, unable to withstand a creative crisis and unrequited love, had thrown herself into one of the city's canals. The article included words of condolence from the grief-stricken Julian and his wife Serafina. They mourned a fragile soul who could not cope with the cruelty of the world. Everything was smooth, polished, proper. Too proper. But one detail snagged me, like a splinter. The article mentioned that when her body was found, Clara was wearing her favorite pearl necklace. But the vision that flashed in my mind was different. I didn't see pearls on a dead girl's neck. I saw them scattered on wet cobblestones. The pearls rolled into the darkness like tears, driven by the wind. The memory inside me knew the truth. The official version was a lie. A skillfully painted still life hiding a bloody murder scene. That same evening, the nightmares returned. But now they were not Julian's nightmares. They were my own. I was standing on the edge of the canal, a cold wind chilling me to the bone. I heard a woman scream, or was it my own? And saw hands, strong and masculine, tearing a string of pearls from my neck. It snapped, and the beads scattered across the stones. And then there was a push. The icy black water embraced me. I woke up in a cold sweat, gasping for air. I wasn't just carrying Julian's memory. I wasn't a vessel for his pain. It was much worse. I was a vessel for the final moments of Clara's life. He hadn't transferred his guilt to me. He had transferred her terror. And now that terror demanded that I not just find the truth, it demanded that I become vengeance. Chapter 3. The Scent of Withered Lilies. Following the ghost, I found the canal, a deserted, melancholic corner of the city where time seemed to have stopped. An old weeping willow bent over the water, its branches, like grieving hands, touching the dark surface. I recognized the place immediately. It lived inside me. I walked to the edge, and the ground beneath my feet felt unstable. An irrational, animal fear gripped me. I closed my eyes, and the smell of silt and rotting leaves mixed in my mind with that same cloying aroma of lilies. It was here. It all happened here. The visions were powerful, but subjective proof. I needed facts, people, witnesses of flesh and blood. The obituary mentioned Clara's sister, her only relative. It took me several days to find her. Eleanor Vance lived in a small apartment on the other side of town, cluttered with old furniture. She was a tired woman with dull eyes, in which, however, the ember of an old pain still smoldered. At first, she didn't want to talk. To her, I was a nobody, a stranger picking at an old wound. I didn't lie. I told her part of the truth, that I had worked for Julian and that I had doubts about the official version of her sister's death. She looked at me for a long time, studying me, as if trying to see something behind my features. Clara could not have killed herself, she finally said in a quiet, broken voice. She loved life more than anything. Yes, she was obsessed with him, that Julian of yours. He was her god, her devil. She wasn't just his student. She was his mistress. And that wife of his, that snake, Serafina, she knew everything. She hated Clara. I listened, and the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. It wasn't a creative crisis. It was a drama soaked in passion and jealousy. But even that didn't explain the full depth of the horror I carried within me. I took a chance. I asked a question to which I felt I already knew the answer. A question dictated not by logic, but by the ghost's memory. Tell me, Eleanor, did Clara have a favorite perfume or flower, something that smelled of lilies? Eleanor's eyes widened. A flicker of fear crossed them. How did you... Yes, lilies, white ones, huge as stars. She adored them, said they were the scent of paradise. Her whole studio smelled of them. How do you know that? I didn't answer, but at that moment, I knew there was no turning back. And then, as if breaking through a final dam, Eleanor exhaled the main secret. She wasn't just his mistress. The night she disappeared, she called me. She was happier than I'd ever heard her. She said, "Ellie, I'm going to have a baby, his baby. I'm going to tell Serafina everything tonight. He will choose us." Those were her last words. A baby. That was the final act in this tragedy. Clara had gone to them not just as a mistress, but as the future mother of his heir. And she was met not with the embrace of her lover, but with the icy water of the canal. Serafina and Julian weren't protecting their love. They were protecting their flawless facade, their sterile world, where there was no room for illegitimate children and scandals. They had performed a restoration of their own lives, entombing the body of Clara and her unborn child under a thick layer of lies. Chapter 4. Confession of a Coward. Now I knew almost everything, but knowing wasn't enough. I needed to hear it from him. I needed him to look me in the eye and admit what he had done. But how to get to Julian? Serafina kept him under a glass dome, guarding her polished treasure. The direct path was closed. I had to find a detour, using the knowledge I had absorbed during my year of service. I knew his passion: rare pigments, ancient techniques, disputes over the authenticity of canvases. I called his private studio, the workshop where he escaped from the world, even from Serafina. I altered my voice, introduced myself as an art historian from abroad, speaking quickly, confidently, rattling off terms, mentioning names I had heard from him. I told him I had information about a long-lost study by his favorite artist, missing since the war. I scheduled a meeting for the next day, knowing he would take such bait. He was waiting for me in his studio, which was flooded with light from enormous windows. When he saw me, his face became a mask of horror and disbelief. He looked better, almost like the man I had nearly fallen in love with. but fear still lurked in his eyes. I didn't accuse. I didn't shout. I walked up to him and began to speak in a voice that seemed to come not from my throat, but from that cold, dark water. I remember how cold it was that evening, Julian, I whispered, and how the lilies I brought for you smelled. I wanted to make you happy, and you ripped the pearls from my neck. Why did you do that? They scattered so beautifully on the stones. He recoiled from me as if from a leper. His face turned white as chalk. He began to tremble, covering his ears with his hands. Go away! Go away, ghost! I'm not a ghost, Julian. I am your memory, the one you got rid of, the one you poured into me. I remember the push, strong, brutal, but I don't remember your face at that moment. I want to remember. Help me, Julian. Who pushed me into the water? And then he broke. He collapsed into a chair, and a groan escaped his chest. Not a scream, but a moan full of years of compressed terror. His confession was disjointed, choked, more horrifying than any accusation. Not me, he sobbed. I didn't push her. I swear, it wasn't me. She came, Clara. She told me about the baby. I panicked. I was scared, and then Serafina appeared. She heard everything. I'd never seen her like that. There wasn't jealousy in her eyes. There was ice. She walked up to Clara and said, "This mistake will not happen." And she pushed her. Just like that. So simply and horribly. And I just stood there. I watched. I heard the splash. I did nothing. I just stood there and watched her drown. I'm not a murderer. I'm a coward. I'm just a coward. There it was. The truth, in all its hideous nakedness. He wasn't tormented by the guilt of a murderer. He was consumed by the shame of a coward who had allowed his love and his child to be killed. And to get rid of that shame, of that sticky knowledge of his own worthlessness, he and Serafina had concocted this monstrous ritual to find an empty vessel and pour all their pus, all their cowardice, all of Clara's final terror into it. He looked at me, and his eyes begged for forgiveness. But I felt nothing, not pity, not anger, only cold, because I understood what I had become. Chapter 5. The Masterpiece. I walked out of his studio, and for the first time in a long while, felt not emptiness or someone else's pain, but absolute crystal clarity. I was not just a carrier of memory. I was their creation, their most perfect and most terrible work of art. A palimpsest on which Clara's terror had bled through my personality, and beneath it, Julian's cowardice. They were restorers, and I was their masterpiece. I returned to their house. This time I didn't knock. The door was unlocked. I entered the flawless hall and saw Serafina. She was sitting in a chair with a book, the very embodiment of peace and control. Seeing me, she didn't flinch, only pursed her lips slightly in annoyance. "You shouldn't have come back," she said coldly. "Did you run out of money?" "I didn't come from money," I replied, and my own voice surprised me with its strength. "I've come home." I walked over to her and placed a small digital recorder on the table, on which I had recorded all of Julian's confession. Serafina looked at it, then at me. For the first time, fear flickered in her eyes. "Are you going to the police?" "The police?" I laughed quietly. "No, Serafina. That would be too simple, too merciful. A trial, prison. It's all so banal. You both deserve something different, a more exquisite punishment. You are connoisseurs of art, are you not?" She was silent, staring at me with wide eyes. I continued, pacing slowly around the room. "Julian took Clara's life, and you, Serafina, took my life. You turned me into this, into a living tombstone, an eternal reminder. You thought you were disposing of a vessel of filth, but you were wrong. You created your greatest masterpiece, and now that masterpiece will live with you." At that moment, Julian stumbled into the hall. He saw me, then Serafina, and he understood everything. He sank onto a chair, covering his face with his hands. "I'm not leaving," I said, addressing them both. "I'm not going anywhere. I will live here. I will sit at the same table with you. I will sleep in the guest room. I will walk in your garden. And every time you look at me, you will see her final terror, his cowardice, your cruelty. I'm not going to the police, Serafina, because a prison has walls, and I am something worse. I am a prison without walls. I am your art, your curse, your eternity." And they could say nothing. To expose me was to expose themselves. To force me out was only to delay the inevitable, for I had the confession. They were caught in the trap they themselves had built. So I stayed. The story had come full circle, returning to its starting point, but everything had changed. I was no longer a powerless companion. I had become the mistress of this house, its silent tyrant, its ghost of flesh and blood. The three of us, the murderer, the coward, and the living memory of their crime, sit down to dinner every evening in deathly silence. They created a monster to find peace, but the monster found a mind of its own. And now, their peace is me. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to the channel, and you'll hear even more captivating stories.